Welcome to Rise and Thrive Women, journeying from surviving to thriving after abuse. We're your hosts, Susie and Heather, and we're so honored that you're here. If you've experienced the heartache of toxic relationships, you know the feeling of being lost, broken, and unsure of where to turn next. And this podcast is for you.
We're here to inspire, educate, and empower women like you, no matter where you are on your healing journey. Together, we'll change the misconceptions surrounding domestic abuse, explore practical solutions, and listen to incredible survivor stories that remind us all that there is a brighter, better future waiting for you. It's time to rise, thrive, and choose yourself. Let's begin this healing journey together.
Yay!
So today we are highlighting an amazing woman, mother, and entrepreneur. Her name is Kat Polsinelli. And Kat comes to us today with a story of victim turned survivor. She dedicates her time traveling to universities and law enforcement facilities to educate those that can make a social impact to end the false narrative around domestic abuse. So many people have a lot of incorrect assumptions that women find themselves in domestic abuse come from a troubled or broken home and suffer from a ton of childhood trauma. And we believe that some of that misinformation stems from old data reported from shelters and facilities with limited demographic information. And before I turn it over to Kat to tell us a little bit more about herself, I just wanted to revisit some numbers that we shared. I think it was earlier this month, if not last month. Susie and I went live about women who are targeted for narcissistic abuse. And so we shared some statistics around the type of women that are targeted. And so I just want to revisit those numbers. Most people think or assume that women that fall victim to narcissistic abuse think that she's a woman that came from troubled home or had a string of bad relationships or codependent or what have you. And so a study done by Sandra L out of Purdue University, she studied over 600 narcissistic abuse cases and debunked all of those misconceptions. And I wanted to revisit that again today because this is tied really largely to some of Kat's work, right? And I think her personal story, she shares, I didn't come from a troubled childhood. I didn't have, a bad upbringing. And so here I am sharing my story about domestic abuse. And so that's kind of her mission. So out of 600 cases, let me see, where is it? Let's see. 67% of those cases did not qualify from the old data used from 40 or 50 years ago that came from the old domestic abuse shelters where most of these women had childhood trauma or a string of bad relationships or come from a broken home. So with all of that said, I'm sorry, Kat, I will hand it over to you to share a little bit more about yourself, your story behind abuse, and how you're using it to help enlighten others.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
We're so excited to have you here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I loved this conversation and I was super intrigued. And I know you guys know that I'm very passionate when it comes to sharing this information as well. So to everybody that's out there, hello, my name is Kat Polsinelli. I am a motivational speaker, an MC, and a podcaster, and I speak on domestic violence awareness. I speak on the resilience behind it, the emotional and psychological abuse that is entailed in it that a lot of people don't seem to think about. And one of the things that I really love sharing is this one component, which is most people that are in a domestic violence situation had a background of an abusive home. Maybe it wasn't the best, it was broken. I didn't have any of that. I had a great childhood, had a great upbringing. My family is still together. I was the oldest of 3 girls, but I was into sports. I was in choir. Like, I had a really, really great upbringing. Now, did I have some tough love? Yeah, that was in that era, right, of getting up and being strong. And I don't think that that necessarily just completely translates to, oh, well, then that means abuse as well. There are so many other components that are broken down into all of these stigmas that have been created that a lot of people just don't honestly know about. And so it's one thing that I really enjoy sharing about with my story is I don't have the typical background that old data, as you said, Heather, has been presented to people. And I think that it is time that we do start shattering that old ancient data to understand that there are so many reasons and things behind why someone gets into that. And the other component is most cases, you're not aware that that's what happened. That's what's happening to begin with. That's the
Right.
biggest component that people do not realize. I think that there is a myth that a lot of people seem to think that they get in this relationship and within a couple of months, this person is beating on them or, tearing them down. And it's like, that's not how it works. There is so much psychological evidence to show that there is a buildup of brainwashing, essentially, to where you strip someone of who they are so that you can teach them to be who you want them to be.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, you said that so well. And your story resonates with me too, because I have a similar background. I had a good childhood, very supportive family, parents. So I love having guests like you on just to highlight that, I guess to break down that stigma and highlight that it really can happen to anyone. So yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey and kind of what brought you to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. And there's so much in the journey. No, I
Yeah.
feel like we all have these stories, right? When we go to share, it's like it's picking out the pieces. And I love to always kind of come back to, in sharing my journey, that there was a part of me that I do feel like may have had a little bit of reasoning as to why I kind of went down the path that I did. So to kind of start there, in high school, I was like the outgoing athletic person who knew everybody and helped everyone and stood up for all the things. And I also, at that point in time, found myself a boyfriend. The first one, young love,
Yes.
right? And so that ended up actually leading into a couple of things that I wasn't really educated on, or the conversation just wasn't necessarily had in my household. And I think that a lot of people around my age can attribute to that, right? Like sex and things like that wasn't always the conversation at hand. It was kind of like, you should know that, right? And so there were some things that happened that led into me allowing people into a space that maybe should have been a little bit more protected, maybe should have had a little bit more boundaries. So then that led into me becoming pregnant at the age of 16. And I know what a lot of people are probably thinking, because I've heard it, which is, okay, well, then that led into wrong. So actually, I got pregnant at 16. I found an alternative school. I left my career wanting to be in softball and being in choir, and I graduated early. I actually graduated second in class. I was president of student council. And then I went into a full-time job where I could take my son with me and put myself in college at night. So I was feeling pretty good about myself, at 17 and a half. Like, I have this job. My parents have never had to pay for my kid. We are striving. I am making up for what I screwed up on, right? That's how I was thinking at that point in time. And actually, what's really interesting is, in that moment of leaving high school and starting a full-time job, my son's father actually disappeared. He decided that, he wanted to go and live his life, and we didn't stay in touch. And so that left me as a single parent at 17 to take care of my son. And in that, then started to become the conversations and disagreements with my family as to how I was living my life. Now, being a teenager at 17, 18, you are like on top of the world, right? Like, I've made up for all these things, and your family can see that you can do better. And so unfortunately, what that led to was this complete disconnect in seeing each other, which meant I left. I was sick and tired of feeling like I wasn't doing enough, even though now I realize that they were just trying to protect me. And so I decided to move out. And in that kind of time frame of all of that, I met another boy. But this boy was very different than my upbringing because he got to do whatever he wanted. He got to talk back to his parents, and he still got things. And I was like, oh, you can do that? And so it was like this realm of, oh my gosh, I don't have to listen to them. I can be my own person. And I think that for him, that was the hook.
Mm-hmm.
That was the pull of,
Yeah.
okay, I can pull her away. And slowly and gradually, it became me and him versus my family.
Oh, wow.
My family was the problem. My family was getting in the way. And for reasons that I understand now, they were trying to protect me in the only way that they knew how. But what that did do is it did push me in that other direction. And that led into my second child at the age of 19, who my family was not allowed to come to the hospital to see him at. To 10 years in that relationship. So at the age of 28, I left that relationship. My boys were 10 and 7 at that time. And I did what any person would do. Try to keep life going while raising 2 children. And so that's what I did. I had a full-time medical job. I took everything I had been through for 10 years and I shoved it down in a box. It came up when I had to go to court, which was 4.5 years of fighting in and out of that. But I didn't realize that I needed to work through that. What's really interesting is I put my kids in therapy, but I did not put myself in it at that time. And so it really took me a really long time to realize 5 years into the making of getting out of this that, maybe there's some things going on with me. In that process, I was diagnosed with being brainwashed. I had PTSD and I was told I had anxiety. And that kind of shattered my world because I was always the strong one. And especially for me, understanding and hearing those terms, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. One, PTSD, that's military, right? That's where that is. That doesn't relate to me. Anxiety, I don't even understand what that word is. I don't even think we learned about that when I was in school. And to hear that you've been brainwashed when you see yourself as this independent person, that's shattering. And so it took a long time for me to understand that you can take those labels and you can allow them to completely debilitate you, or you can learn about them and see how you can grow past them. And in seeing that, and also realizing my kids were unhealed and going through their own traumas at a very different age, where their capacity to understand just wasn't there, really made me realize that things had to be done differently. And so about 5 years ago is when I dove into the world of personal development and understanding the psychology of the brain. And to me, that was the most fascinating world that I feel like anyone could ever be in. And through that, I just kind of stumbled into setting up boundaries, which cost me my job in the medical industry, to leaving, deciding to do something different. I stepped into the world of real estate thinking I can still help people, which I ended up coaching and selling. And then that broadened the space into, oh my gosh, I love helping people and I want people to understand. And what I decided to do in that time was to lead with my story. Because while not everyone has been in a domestic situation, we all have scars that nobody else can see, that we are allowing to choose for us in the world that we live in today. And so that's kind of led me to where I'm at now, which is sharing my journey and inspiring other people to realize that more of us have gone through things than what we can even imagine. It's just that you don't see those scars because they are hidden, they are invisible. And when we can learn to see other people's invisible scars and give grace and lead with curiosity, we are curating an entire new world of how we see people and how we can help ourselves and others start to lean in and work through the traumas that they've been through.
Ooh, preach.
Wow. Yeah. Your story is so inspiring. Thank you for sharing all that. So you mentioned you were in that relationship for about 10 years. And, you know, I'm sure you hear this often. Heather and I hear it all the time from the women we work with and who are part of our group that, you know, you stay in it for so long, so much longer than when you look back and you think, I saw the red flags. I knew this wasn't healthy for me, but we stay. It's very difficult to leave these relationships. So can you tell us a little bit about what your mindset was while you were in it and kind of why you stayed. What were those, I guess, factors that kind of kept you in that relationship?
Yeah. And I love this question too. And I love that you asked this. So thank you for that, because I do think that that is the one question that is like zooming around in people's minds all the time. Well,
Yeah.
like, if this was happening, then why did you stay? Well,
Mhm.
because by that time, you're already trying to figure out who on earth you are and if what they are saying is true or if what you are thinking is true. By the
Mhm.
time you realize that you need to leave, there is so much broken down from who you are that you question everything. So I love to say, for those that are in the entrepreneurial space, think of when you've gone to do something difficult and you're like, oh my gosh, I just don't know if I can do that, because you don't have the proof. So
Mhm.
imagine having somebody berating you constantly. This is your fault. You started this. If you wouldn't have done this, this wouldn't have happened. And it gets to the point to where it's on such a repeat that you're like, well, are they right? Did
Right.
I start that? That does kind of make sense. And so it gets to a point to where you can't figure out which direction is right. Because in one hand, there's this little bitty spark that is saying, please listen. And on this
Yeah.
other hand, you have this person that in that moment you love, right? You want to be with them. You're raising your children together. And you're like,
Mhm.
but they wouldn't hurt me. So they must be telling me the truth. And you just start to think about these things. And it is so hard to
Mhm.
understand that what they could be saying is an absolute and complete lie, because if you can do better than them, then that looks bad on themselves. And we can't
Right.
have that happening. And so you get in this mindset. And then there's other factors that play into it as well, such as, okay, where do I go? If I was to leave, what would happen? Am I going to lose my children? He said he would take my kids away. Is that a possibility? Would they think that I wasn't a good mom? I'm not a good mom. How could I let my kids be in this situation?
Yeah.
And then you start to think about your family. Okay, well, maybe I can go back to my family. Well, I can't do that. What are they going to think of me? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to hate me? Are they going to be mad at me for what I allowed my children to go through? So when you think about this, it's on repeat and people don't realize this.
Mhm. Yeah. So true. Yeah. Oh my goodness. You just said that so well too.
Well, and just so you
And
know, Kat, well, I like asking this question because I just want to make sure that the reason we ask is because it's almost the same across the board
Mhm.
why women stay. It's not more so like, well, why did you stay so long? It's more so, let's hear everyone else say the same thing that our
Yeah.
listeners are probably thinking as well.
Absolutely. And
So
there's so much shame around it.
Mhm.
That's the number one thing I hear coming through from people when they're talking about that, just that shame of staying. And you summed it up so well of the reasons why we do, you know.
I'm
So
just curious to know, because we all like the journey seems consistent. Thank you so much for being so
yeah.
vulnerable with us, Kat. We love you.
Yeah.
No worries.
Keeps
It will
me when
always, those emotions will always be there. We
yeah.
understand
And
that.
that's okay. Yeah.
But there's always this shift, right? Like, I can't do this anymore. And you start to kind of picture what your life is going to be like if you do decide to leave. Can you tell us what that was for you and like what it took for you to shift your mindset into, am I doing the right thing, to this is absolutely the right thing and I have to do this?
Yeah. And what's really interesting is about 7 to 8 years into it, I was really just starting to be like, this can't keep going on. Like something has to be done differently.
Mhm.
And one of the pivotal pieces of seeing that is really interesting because it wasn't really about me. It was actually about my kids. And it's this time where we were having this huge argument in the living room. And I know there's a lot of screaming and yelling back and forth. And I remember standing by the couch and my kids were in the hallway and they were coming out as we were arguing. And both of my children, which at that time were 5 and 7, looked at me with their hands on their hips. And they're like, yeah, Mom, this is your fault. You're the bad guy. Why do you always start this? To hear that come from your children is 10 times different than hearing it from someone that you think loves you. Because that love is eternal. That love is inevitable. And you are there to protect. And so it was actually in that moment that I was like, oh my God, how can they say that to me? How can I allow them to be someone that then turns around and says that to other people that they love? Which is really interesting when I think about it, because I was like, I can take it, it's fine. But hearing it from my kids, that was the moment where I was like, this cannot go on anymore.
Yeah.
It has to change. And it still took 2 years. I did try to plan it. I did try to plot it. I got back in touch with my family. I would take secret phone calls at work to try and figure out how we could get me out of the situation.
Yeah.
And I actually remember telling my dad on the phone, it's not the right time. And he was like, what? I'm like, something doesn't feel right. I need to wait. I didn't realize that waiting was going to be another 2 years. But I did. I waited for whatever reason it was. Now, I will say in that time, I got more of a stable job. I was in the medical field. I could then support myself. And there's a lot of things that continued to happen throughout that. And, you know, Heather, to your question of actually leaving, the day that decision was made, that decision was actually made almost for me. And I say that because I came to work after an argument, one of the first times that I had ever had physical bruises on me after an altercation. One of the first times. And I went into work and I was working with a patient that I knew worked in the law space. I knew it. I didn't know exactly what he did, but I knew he was getting his degree. And I remember having a conversation. Now, in my brain, what I'm thinking that I'm asking him is just tiptoeing around, trying to figure out what it would look like if you were to leave someone. How does that work when you have kids? Because you're not married, is it different? I can't tell you what I had in that conversation, but what I can tell you is at the end of that conversation, that patient sat up on the therapy table and said, you have 2 options. You can call the police and report this, or I will call them for you because I work in the domestic violence center at the courthouse.
Wow.
So in that moment, funny enough, because it was so ingrained and so normal for me, when I came in that morning with a busted lip and bruises on me that no one could see, I went to the bathroom and cleaned myself up and went right into my job.
Wow.
So many of us do that.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that all of what you said is very common as well. And I think it will resonate with so many people. I think most of us make that decision to leave, but it's hard to find the right timing. It's hard to find, your perfect scenario for getting out. So sometimes we do stay. Sometimes we stay for years after we've made that decision. So, yeah.
I love that you were I'm sorry, Susie.
No,
I have a question.
No,
I love that the first patient that you saw happened to be law enforcement. And I am really relieved and happy to know how supportive they were of you.
Oh, yeah. There have been some really great ones. And I've
Yeah.
had some disassociated ones as well.
Right.
So,
yeah, for sure. I'm just curious with your public speaking that you do. I know you do public speaking with law enforcement and other groups, domestic violence centered topics. What would you say you've seen people come away with from your speaking events as like key learnings or aha moments that people have after hearing you speak and maybe learning something new about domestic violence?
yeah. I have seen, oh my gosh, I've had so many people come up afterwards and talk to me. And I think that one of the biggest takeaways is actually what we're talking about today, which is I didn't know that that's how it happened. I didn't know that that's how you felt. I didn't know that that's how it started. I didn't realize that you went through thinking that many things and it's that hard to get out of it. And I didn't realize some of the things that I feel and that I've been through, I can actually relate to that. And that to me cracks it wide open for people to understand that those that have been in a domestic violence situation, they're not over here and you're over here living your life. There's a lot of crosses over. There's a lot of traumas and things that we hear, emotional things that we take in. It's just you associated it here and you seem to think that this will not affect you. And so the amount of people that have come forward that have been like, I actually understand that. And I haven't been in an abusive situation, but I know that feeling. I've had those thoughts before. That's where the connection to me is absolute key, is realizing that those that have been through situations like that really are not as different from you as you tend to think that they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like the negative stigma forces it forces us to separate ourselves from it, because we have this idea of what a domestic violence victim is, and typically they are projected to come from low income, broken home, troubled childhood, like those constant negative qualifiers that we associate with domestic violence, that it has such a bad stigma that I would say probably 90% of the women that I talk to and that I know, and it's probably just the line of work that I do, but I worked in corporate America for 16 years, and almost every woman that I've talked to has gone through it on some level, right? Even if it hasn't been physical, it's been like manipulation, gaslighting, emotional abuse, verbal, like those sort of abuses. We've all gone through it. And even being in a marriage that hasn't gotten physical, they will stay in that marriage because they know how abusive their partners could become. And they stay in it anyway because they've separated themselves from domestic, from that stigma, and knowing that if I leave, if I file for a divorce, or if I decide, even if you're not married, and you've been in this relationship, lived together for so long, if I leave, this person is going to fly off the handle, and then everyone is going to know, and they are going to associate me with this domestic violence victim and assume that I fall in all of these categories that I don't want to associate with. So,
so true. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and that's actually a really good segue into what I was just going to ask you, which is, why do you think it's so important that we reshape how people see abuse and abolish the negative stigma behind what domestic violence is and what it looks like?
I think that it's really important to have this conversation on a larger scale level, because it's easier for us to put something in a box and say, I don't know that, I don't understand it, I'm going to go on living my life, but you're not helping the situation. All you're doing is separating yourself so that you don't have to feel and understand something that makes you extremely uncomfortable. I aim to make people uncomfortable because that is how you create change. You need to understand how people feel, not just because you would understand abuse better, but because you may actually end up understanding somebody else better down the road.
Right.
And it also opens up a space of curiosity, learning to lean in and ask questions instead of making assumptions, which our society is phenomenal at doing, right? And our brains do that anyway. When you have part of a story, it's very easy for you to be like, oh, well, probably wasn't the greatest anyway then. And I feel for them, I really do. But, I didn't have that, so there's no way that I can, understand what they're going through. And I call BS on that wholeheartedly, because we really are a lot more similar than what we want to think we are. Because if you can say you're not, you can put yourself here and leave everyone else below you. And I don't believe that anyone is below me or above me.
Yeah.
There are people that have experienced far worse in that sector than I have. My story is just as important as theirs. And their story deserves to be shared in the same light that mine is being shared, because that is how we create acknowledgement, and we start to educate people to understand that this is not an isolated incident.
Right.
It's almost a disintegration of toxic shame. I mean, like as you're talking about this, it's like we want people to open their eyes and understand how this happens, right? It always starts up here. Like abusers always start in the mind. But then we stay because we're going to be ashamed of feeling like we're failures. We're going to be ashamed of feeling judged, breaking up our home, not having our kids, with both parents in the same home. We're going to be associated with all of these negative things. Almost every reason that we stay, aside from any sort of financial dependence, it's almost always around, what are people going to think?
Yeah.
What are people going to think? Are people going to reject me? Are people not going to speak to me anymore? Are people not going to want to be associated with me? And so
Right.
I really love the way that you're phrasing it, because it's almost like we're going to have these conversations, and I'm going to make people listen, because we've reached a point where people are, afraid of leaving or living the lives that they want and love to live, because they're so fearful of being shamed publicly or internally. So I really love that, because the more we talk about it, the more it's accepted, and the more, this stranger that you just had a conversation with in this, speaking event now understands it and will look at this person and say, it's okay. It's okay. These things happen and they're everywhere. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why it feels so validating when women that feel like they've been alone for just, I guess, anyone in general, but people that have gone through this feel so alone for so long because they don't have anyone to confide in. A lot of people hide it. And when we find these communities and hear people like you list off all of those things that you thought, like why you were staying for so long, it's validating, because you feel like you're less alone. And so I think doing what you're doing is, it's amazing, because it's almost like shedding a light on everyone who may or may not understand it, and kind of welcome the vulnerability if they do meet a stranger on the street that happens to be going through this. So
Right. For sure. I'm just curious, Kat, now that you're through and you're on the other side of this, what advice would you give to the woman listening right now who knows she's in a toxic situation? She knows she's in an abusive relationship and she wants to get out, but is struggling to leave. What advice would you give to that woman?
Knowing that you want to leave is the most important piece. Everything else that is after that does not have to be planned. It does not have to be strategically laid out. You just have to go for it. You just have to go for it. Find resources. Learn what you can so that you can start protecting yourself. If you cannot get out of a situation immediately, there are resources online. There are hotlines that you can contact. There are sources on Google and everything. Please make sure you delete your history.
Right.
But there are ways for you to educate yourself to understand so that you can start to see that it's not all you, because it's not.
Yeah.
It is 100% the other person who is manipulating you because they have torn you down. And so starting with education and resources and reaching out where you can is the first step. The rest of it will figure itself out. I promise you. The day that I had someone make that decision for me to go forward, I had zero freaking clue what was going to happen next. And I am so glad that I took that and ran with it, because all of the pieces fell into place afterwards.
Yeah. Oh, that's so, yeah. I think that will resonate with a lot of people.
it almost never works out the way you plan it, even if you do spend time planning it anyway.
This is true.
Sorry, not to poo-poo on anyone who's planning right now, but I mean, you can prepare so much, but once you're in it, it's almost like, it intensifies to where, like, when reality sets in, and then, I mean, nothing is going to go exactly how you plan it anyway, I guess is what I will say. So,
right. Yeah.
I would agree with that, Kat.
Mhm. Definitely. And there's never a perfect time to leave either,
No,
so.
Mhm.
it's almost always really abrupt, too. I do know I know a couple of people who planned it, and was able to escape, without situations like that. They were fearful of their physical safety. And so making sure that all of the right things lined up to, like knowing where they're going to be and how long they're going to be out of the home and how long you have
Mhm.
to gather whatever it is that you're gathering and go, those sort of things are essential. But most everyone else, that I've talked to, it happens very abruptly anyway. Because the abuse typically gets to a point where it's unbearable, and it'll escalate to where it's like a quick, knee-jerk reaction, and you have to get out. So
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. Yes. Did we have any questions come in, Heather, at all while we were
I
chatting?
do. I'm not streaming on Instagram today.
Okay.
So I don't think so. I'm assuming that my YouTube channel will come in the
Yeah,
way
it
it does
would pop
for your
up. I
channel.
didn't see any come through on my channel either, but I was just curious if you saw any on your end.
I don't. I don't know, Kat, do you have any folks on your end that are asking any questions? This is typically when we do Q&A.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything, but I wasn't totally paying attention either. But I haven't seen anything on this side. And I, to anybody that's watching this, whether it's live or you end up watching this as the replay, like ask the questions anyway. We can
Yeah,
always continue the conversations in the comments, or if it's something very
sure.
personal, like you can always reach out individually. It's not that this conversation stops here. I think that this conversation is the beginning to allow more integration and understanding and to think differently than what we have before.
Absolutely. Totally
You
agree.
said you have a speech coming up, don't you? Is that what you were just?
I do have a speech coming up. I will be a part of a panelist group that will be at MTSU. We will be speaking on domestic violence and sexual assault. So it'll be a panel of, I believe, 6 to 8 of us that will be doing questions, or we'll have questions presented by the professor, but also an open Q&A. I actually did put it on my social media, as we are also opening it up to Zoom as well, to invite
Oh,
people who
awesome.
cannot be there
Ooh.
live. So I am actually super excited about that. And we have a really great diverse group of people, from people that also work at the college to a law enforcement officer who will be there. So there'll be questions that will be asked, and there'll be the opportunity for open Q&A for people to be able to do like this and be able to ask additional questions. So that's the next thing that is immediately coming up mid-March that I'll be a part of, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah, that
So
sounds
is
really
that open to the public? Can they register, or is that just specific to the university?
It is open to the public. Originally, it's been something that's just been done at the university. The professor that's been hosting this for the last couple of years has decided to open it up. So there is a QR code to be able to register so that you can be on Zoom.
Oh, can you share that? Did you share that in the socials? I'm curious. Do you want us to drop it in our comments so
I don't think I shared it, but I can definitely pull the link and get you guys the information.
Yeah, if you want to send it to us following our show today, I can include that in our show notes too. I have your socials linked as well, so go follow Kat for more information and more inspiration, I would say. Yeah, all the
Thank
things.
you. Thank you. No, I appreciate this space, and I appreciate the open honesty and the vulnerability. And to be honest, asking the questions that you are asking that really do dive in past the surface, because it's so easy for us to answer questions like, oh, what have you been through? And then move straight on to
Right.
where someone is at now. And I do feel like a lot of us are missing that middle component, which is where a lot of us find ourselves, is in that muddy middle. And we're looking for someone to help pull us out, or to give us that idea so that we can figure out how to get out of it. And that's what I was looking for years ago that I didn't see. And so I appreciate you guys for holding this space so that people can grab onto their own rope to pull themselves out of something.
Yes,
absolutely.
that's the goal, and we appreciate your openness and vulnerability too. to be
I
willing
think
to
the
share.
biggest thing that, if anything from these shows that we're doing, I'm trying to form thoughts right now. A couple weeks ago, Susie and I did a show called You Aren't Stupid, You Were Just Targeted. And because so many of us, like you said, Kat, it starts in the mind and they break us down. They break us down mentally. But the story you shared, you don't sound like a weak person. Nothing that you went through, you were 16 years old living an adult life just because you felt like you needed to make up for this, early unplanned pregnancy, right? And so nothing that you did says weak, says stupid, says anything. It says you are a strong ass woman who will handle your business. Okay. And so I think the point we're trying to make and why we're asking so many women to share their stories, because every woman that we've had on this show is anything but weak, anything but stupid. And so I think the more we talk about it and the more we share our stories, like what you're doing, the more we do this, the more it's going to empower others to say, I can do this too. I have all of these attributes within all of these characteristics that defined who I was before I entered this relationship. I still have those strengths. I'm going to reach down, I'm going to find them, and I'm going to pull myself out of here. So
yes,
that's our goal here. Anyways, is to highlight as many strong women as we possibly can, share the parts of ourselves when we felt weak and thought we couldn't do it and thought we needed this, this person or these people or whatever the case may be, and also highlight where they are now. You have an incredible story and a lot of gifts to share. So thank you.
Yes. So many. It was awesome having you on.
Well, thank you, ladies. I appreciate the opportunity to have the space.
Awesome. And I'm going to try to join that conversation that you're having next month. That sounds amazing.
Thank you.
So, yes.
Really quick. So for those watching, if you are perhaps going through, if you're in active abuse or recently out of abuse and you're seeking community, Susie and I have an online group. It's called Rise and Thrive Women. The link to that group, it's a Facebook group. So it's free to join. There's just some security questions that you have to answer so that we know that you're not a robot. We would love to have you there. I think we're up to 350 some odd members now. So we would love to have you there. We have monthly meetings on Zoom for those who may need that resource. And it's just full of other women who have similar stories, and we just support one another there. So just in case you're interested, you could find us there.
Yes. Come hang out with us over there.
If we don't have any questions, I'll go ahead and close this out.
All right. I don't see any that have come through.
All right. Well,
but sorry. But
okay.
Drop them in the comments, just a reminder.
Yep. Yeah. So we can continue the conversation in comments. Kat, I'll make sure that you have access to those as well.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us on this episode of Rise and Thrive Women. We hope today's conversation has inspired you to take charge of your healing journey, whether it's a new perspective, renewed hope, or the courage to move forward. It is something worth celebrating.
And remember that your story is still unfolding and your past does not define you. Within you lies strength, power, and limitless potential. So embrace it. Trust and follow your intuition with courage. Be bold, be brave, and always trust yourself. Until we meet again, take care, rise above, and thrive. You've got this. And thank you, Kat. All right. Bye, everybody.